Midweek Pictorial, July 29, 1920. A unique series of pictures is here presented showing a remarkable baseball team that is making the round of the country and putting up fast ball against the best of the semi-professional teams. They belong to the House of David, a quaint religious sect that has its headquarters in Benton Harbor, Michigan. One of the requirements of the sect is that the members must not cut their hair or beards, and the pictures show that this has been fully complied with by the members of the team. They present a striking contrast to the clean-shaven and closely cropped athletes that make up the nines of the major leagues. But hair was a help rather than a handicap to Samson, and these athletes have proved that they are antagonists worthy of respect on the baseball diamond. Some of them are such phenomenal players that the major leagues have pursued them with offers of big money if they would sign up. Mooney, the pitcher, and Hannaford, the first baseman, have been offered $25,000 and $30,000 respectively to play in the majors. Mooney, the pitcher of the House of David team, snapped just after he had delivered a ball to the batter. He has a mighty arm and a full assortment of troublesome curves and drops. Hannaford, the star first baseman of the House of David, going up in the air to gather in a high throw. Close play in a practice game, with one of the members of the team sliding into second and making it. That the housing shortage is not confined to New York is shown by this photograph of a van in London, in which a family has packed up its belongings and is going about hunting for a dwelling. The London Housing Bond Committee has undertaken to help the nomadic family. Symbolic picture shown at Zion City, Illinois, July 13th, representing the figure of Zion. The giant figure was 372 feet long and was composed of two bands, a white-robed choir of about 500 members, 750 schoolchildren, 50 Zion guards, and 100 robed officers. The sword is made of 125 Bibles, all opened up. Brooklyn Masons in a parade to celebrate the laying of the cornerstone of the Ridgewood Masonic Temple being erected at Gates Avenue and Bushwick Parkway. Several thousand Masons were in line. The new building, when completed, is expected to be one of the ornaments of the city. First flight of U.S. Navy airship D-1. It is 200 feet long, has a speed of 58 miles an hour, and a cruising radius of 1,000 miles. Mystery ship produced by William B. Stout, an American aeronautical engineer. The monoplane is nothing but a giant wing, with all the machinery and trussing in the wing. The engines are set in the leading edge, the passengers are enclosed between the surfaces of the wing skin, and every part that is exposed to the air is designed to lift. The ship follows more closely the butterfly than the bird in its plan, and gives more surface within smaller dimensions than has hitherto been thought possible. War thrills were furnished in abundance at the recent Royal Air Force aerial pageant at Hendon, England on July 3rd. A kite balloon is here shown falling in flames after it had been shot down. The observer escaped by leaping from the blazing balloon with a parachute and reached the ground safely. It was an exact duplication of many such occurrences during the war. Ireland still continues under a reign of terror. Killings are of almost daily occurrence, and the methods of repression thus far adopted by the British government have proved wholly ineffective to restore order to the distracted country. A recent tragedy was the killing of Colonel Smythe, a one-armed veteran of the war and wearer of the Victoria Cross, who was shot to death at the country club in Cork on July 17th. A band of 14 armed men entered the building, inquired for Smythe, and when he started to rise, fired a volley which killed him instantly. None of the assassins have been arrested, and if they were, it is doubtful whether any jury that could be assembled in Cork would convict. One of the most difficult tasks that the British government has to face in Ireland is to secure the conviction by Irish juries of anyone concerned in outrages. In many cases, it is difficult to secure a panel of jurors, and even when the jury is actually formed, a verdict of guilty is impossible to secure, even when the evidence is overwhelmingly against the prisoner. The scene of the latest hostilities has been transferred from Londonderry to Cork. On the night of July 18th, the city was plunged into terror as a result of street fighting, in which Sinn Féiners and British soldiers participated. 2 men were killed, some 40 were wounded, and it is reported, though afterward denied, that bombs had been used to blow up motor lorries loaded with soldiers. Photo caption: General view of Cork, Ireland, now torn by revolt. Carlisle Square in Londonderry, the favorite battleground of the Unionists and Sinn Féiners in the nightly encounters that for more than a week kept the city in terror. Machine guns swept the streets before the town was brought finally under control. Children are children the world over, and the passions and hatreds of their parents cannot subdue their spirits. Some of them are here shown keeping company with British soldiers at a sandbag barricade. Germany was startled on July 18th by the news that Prince Joachim, the youngest son of the former German emperor, had committed suicide in his residence, the Villa Liegnitz, at Potsdam. The report was at first denied, but afterward confirmed. It seems that the prince had returned to his home early July 17th in an agitated state, and had shot himself about 8 o'clock in the morning. The real cause of the suicide is unknown. By some, it has been laid to his domestic troubles, he having secured a divorce from his wife. By others, it is attributed to financial entanglements. It is said that the prince had been apprehensive lest he should be forced to remove from his residence at Potsdam and perhaps leave the country. He is said to have been the favorite son of the ex-empress, and his death was concealed from her because of the fear that it might prove fatal to her in her present condition of health. The prince was reported early in the war to have been wounded, but this report has never been fully substantiated. A few weeks ago, he made a visit to his father at Doorn, Holland, and was then reported to have been in cheerful spirits. Lifebelt from the ill-fated Lusitania, shown on the man who found it floating off the end of a pier in Philadelphia. It is estimated that it must have traveled 11,000 miles. It was covered with seaweed, and one arm strap was broken. The Bolsheviki, in their westward push, have reached the vicinity of the former Russo-German battle line on the western edge of the Pripyat marshes. Here the Poles are making a stand, and heavy fighting is in progress at various points. The Bolsheviki have brought up armored trains from the railroad leading southwest from Minsk and along another railroad extending through the marshes from Mosier and Kalenkovich. In this region, the Bolsheviki have reached where the railroad gauge changes from the Russian broad to the standard gauge, which will handicap the Bolsheviki if they attempt immediately to continue eastward, should they be able to pass the old Russo-German deadline. Lida, about 60 miles south of Vilna, where the railroad gauge also changes, is now in the hands of the Bolsheviki, and latest reports say that there is fighting south of Lida, some Bolshevist detachments having crossed the river Niemen in the region of Novogradek. The Bolshevist sweep across Lithuania is giving the Soviet forces the possession of a rich harvest, as they are occupying thousands of acres planted by the Poles, the grain and hay now standing in stacks. When they took Vilna, they came into possession of 7 carloads of American beans, which the American Relief Association was unable to evacuate, owing to the railroads being crowded with refugees. The food in the warehouses at Bialystok, stored there for use of the children who are fed by the American Relief Association, is being loaded upon cars for shipment to a safer place. The refugees in the Bialystok region are also being removed as a precautionary measure. It is said in Polish quarters that the retreat on the northern front is being continued in an orderly way, according to plan. The Poles, it is declared, lost little rolling stock and not a single working locomotive. In military circles, it was stated that identification of prisoners from various Russian units had shown that in excess of 8 Bolshevist divisions were on the front, more than half of them on the front line, the others in support. On the northern front, the reserve divisions are being moved westward on the heels of the advancing troops, while in other sectors they are being brought forward as the needs demand. Photo caption: Polish women of Lemberg organized to man artillery to repel the invading Soviet forces. They are full of warlike ardor and enthusiasm. Polish troops from the province of Poznan passing in review before entraining to go to the help of their sorely pressed comrades. Devastation left in the wake of the Soviet armies as they sweep like a swarm of locusts over the Polish border, destroying cities in their path. Polish peasants fleeing before the Bolshevist invasion. They are crowding the roads that lead to the Polish capital. Polish Marines manning artillery on an armored gunboat on the river Berezina. Fighting has been in progress there for several weeks to prevent the Bolshevist forces from crossing. Colonel Sikorsky directing the defense of the Polish troops in the Pripyat region. General Gandzielski inspecting a regiment of Polish troops before they left for the Vilna front. The men are veterans who fought under General Haller in the war on the Western Front. Workmen at the Spandau, Germany salvage works, destroying shells by means of acetylene torches. Metal will be used for peace purposes. Imposing ceremonies marked the laying of the cornerstone of the monument that is to be erected at Verdun, France, to commemorate the heroic defense of the city against the Germans. Greeting interchanged between Premiers Lloyd George of England and Mitterrand of France. They are on the golf course, the cares of state momentarily laid aside, and the utmost friendliness evidently exists between them. Queen Mary of England shaking hands with Piper Finlater, a wearer of the Victoria Cross. The blessing of the waters at Ostend, Belgium. It is an annual ceremony, and is carried out with great pomp. The procession, led by young girls, is here seen passing along one of the quays of the great Belgian seaport. The Bolshevist rulers have now been in control of Russia long enough to enable the world at large to judge the value of its new experiment in government. The controlling figures are Lenin, the practical dictator, and Trotsky, the minister of war. The former is by far the more intellectual of the two. Trotsky is a fiery orator and the mouthpiece of the decisions reached by the government. They have surrounded themselves with a group of leaders quite as fanatical as themselves, but who are devoted heart and soul to the revolution, and, as far as is known, are loyal to their leaders. Exact information as to conditions in Russia has not been obtainable until recently. The world's knowledge is derived chiefly from the stories told by refugees, and from narratives of diplomatic officials who have resided in Russia during the rule of the Soviet regime. These agree in the statement that for a long period, a veritable reign of terror existed in Russia. Men and women were shot, sometimes singly, sometimes in squads, with scarcely a pretense of trial. horrors of the French Revolution are not comparable with those that have occurred under Soviet rule. The killings have been accompanied in many cases by revolting cruelty, torture and mutilation being common. Testimony can be gathered from the columns of official Bolshevist organs, confirming the execution of thousands of suspected persons. It is now claimed by the Soviet that this reign of terror has been abolished. As regards social and economic conditions in Russia, the testimony is a unit. Agriculture has been paralyzed because the peasants, following the confiscation of their crops by the ruling authorities, have simply sown enough to support themselves and families. Even when compensation was offered, it was in worthless money that would purchase scarcely anything that the peasants required. Transportation has utterly broken down, and 3/4 of the rolling stock and locomotives have been put out of commission. Mining operations are not employing 1/3 of the men that they did before the downfall of the Tsar. The output of the factories is less than 1/2 of the normal production. An enormous inflation of the currency has taken place, owing to the fact that money has been printed as fast as the presses could turn it out. In the great cities of the empire, cholera, typhus, and other diseases due to malnutrition have claimed thousands of victims. Petrograd has been reduced from a city of over 2 million inhabitants to one of 650,000. Deaths during the past winter were so frequent that coffins had to be rented instead of sold, as there were not enough to provide for the interment of the dead. Some of these facts are admitted, others are palliated by the Soviet government. It has been claimed that what conditions existed were only those that were inevitable in so great a revolution as that which has convulsed the former empire. Photo caption: May Day procession at Moscow, the capital of Soviet Russia. The float in the foreground represents labor triumphant. The labor situation in Russia has been in a most unsatisfactory condition, and Lenin and Trotsky have recently taken drastic steps to remedy it. The armies in the field after the downfall of Denikin and Kolchak were declared to be armies of labor and were mobilized as such under military discipline. Red troops headed by military bands marching through Moscow celebrating the victory over Denikin. The only internal military resistance remaining is that directed by Wrangel in southern Russia. The Greek offensive in Asia Minor has been consistently successful. The Turkish forces under Mustafa Kemal were disastrously defeated at Akhisar and thrown into utter rout. The Greeks advanced to Brussa, which they captured after only a feeble resistance. Brussa is a town 57 miles southeast of Constantinople, and was formerly the capital of the Ottoman Empire in Asia. At the time that expulsion of the Turks from Europe was threatened, Brussa was frequently spoken of as the probable capital that would take the place of Constantinople. British warships cooperated with the Greek advance, and rendered essential service by shelling hostile forces on the shores of Asia Minor. The Turkish government and people are reported to be demoralized by the defeats of the nationalists under Kemal. Their consternation has been increased by the flood of refugees pouring into the Turkish capital. The success of the campaign was hardly in question from the beginning, as the Greeks had a well-disciplined army of 100,000 men with ample arms and munitions, while the forces commanded by Kemal were of inferior quality and did not exceed 57,000. There is scarcely a doubt that the Turkish government, although disavowing complicity with Kemal, was secretly in sympathy with him, and as far as possible furthered his undertakings. Further operations have been carried on by the Greeks in the matter of the occupation of Thrace, which was assigned to them by the terms of the peace treaty. Preparations had been made for resistance on the part of the Turks in that province, and in this they were said to have the support of the Bulgarians and other Slavic elements. Orders have been received, however, by the Turks in that province to offer no resistance to the Greek occupation, and at latest accounts it was proceeding satisfactorily. The outstanding feature of the week has been the brusque letter addressed to the Turkish government by the Supreme Council of the Allies. It is one of the most drastic communications in the history of modern diplomacy. It reviews the conduct of the Turks in their treatment of the Armenians and holds them to full responsibility for joining the Central Powers in the war. It demands immediate signature of the peace treaty, and as an alternative threatens the expulsion of the Turks from Europe. The receipt of the letter caused dismay in Constantinople. 2 ministers resigned from the cabinet, and threats were freely made that the treaty would not be signed. It seems apparent that the long period of indecision of the Allied powers in their treatment of the Turks has finally come to an end. Photo caption: Greek troops at Smyrna on the march to attack the forces of Mustafa Kemal. Gordon Highlanders marching through Constantinople on their way to reinforce a company of British Indian troops who had been attacked by Turkish nationalists at Izmit, a port about 50 miles east of the Turkish capital. While hostilities had been going on in Anatolia, another outbreak threatened in Syria between the Syrian nationalists under Prince Faisal and the French forces under General Gouraud. Syria had been assigned to France as a mandatory after a prolonged discussion of the question at the peace conference. It was claimed by the Arabs that Syria should be placed under Arabian control. Forces were raised by Faisal to resist the threatened French occupation, and an ultimatum was issued by General Gouraud demanding compliance with the decision of the peace conference. It seemed for a time as though hostilities were inevitable, but it was reported on July 20th that the French mandate over Syria had been accepted by Faisal under conditions. Whether those conditions would be accepted by the French was a matter of conjecture. Photo caption: Emir Faisal, head of the Arab forces who have sought to hold Syria. Revolutionists are threatening at present the capture of Peking. Negotiations had been opened at Shanghai between representatives of the northern government and representatives of the Canton government, the latter having become dissatisfied with the militaristic aims of the Guangxi and Kwantung leaders. This, it was expected, would have led to a speedy reunion of the main factions whose antagonism had for years kept the Republic in turmoil. New problems developed, however, through the dismissal of General Xu Chu-cheng, resident commissioner of Inner Mongolia and commander on the northwest frontier. This action had been taken early in July, and was due to hostile feeling between the Reform Party, at whose head was General Cheng So-ling, and the Ungi Party, to which Xu Chu-cheng belonged. His colleagues, General Wu Peifu and Cao Kun, took up arms on his behalf and threatened an advance on Peking. This created a panic in the capital. Efforts were made to compose the quarrel, and the president, Xu Shichang, ordered both sides to retire to their barracks and enter upon negotiations. The effort was ineffective, however. Tuan Chi-Zhui was surprised by Wu Peifu's troops south of Nanyao and retreated toward the capital. In the severe fighting that followed July 15th to 18th, the forces of Wu Peifu were victorious. The demoralized troops of Tuan Chi-Zhui were reported as retreating toward Peking. The diplomatic corps in that city served notice on the government that Peking must not be bombarded and that the safety of foreign residents must be assured. The gates of the city were closed and martial law declared. Members of the old imperial family appealed to the foreign legations for protection, as they feared that they would be made the victims of propaganda, alleging that General Wu Peifu was carrying on a movement for the restoration of the monarchy. Photo caption: View of the Forbidden City at Peking, China, with the former emperor's palace at left. China is now a republic. Students at the Chinese War College at Canton that corresponds to our West Point. The farmer may sow and plow, but his work comes to nothing if the activity of insect pests is unchecked. Photo caption: Potato fields in South Jersey ruined by potato bugs. Spraying machine at work in potato field, spraying 4 rows at once with chemicals. Outdoor festival of the Gymnastics School of Dijonville, Paris, under the patronage of Marshal Pétain. The girl contestants are here seen making the round of the track before the actual events, which included racing, jumping, and hurdling, began. Annual contest held at the Tidal Basin Bathing Beach at Washington, D.C., July 17th. The 2 young ladies in front were the winners of silver cups. Miss Elizabeth Roach, left, won the prize for wearing the most attractive bathing suit, and Miss Edith M. Williams, right, for being declared the most beautiful girl. The judges were a portrait painter, an art critic, and a linguist, all of Washington. Running race of Tokyo Young Women's Association, in which the winner is seen reaching the tape after an exciting contest. Among the ways in which Japan is following the example of the Occidental nations is included athletics, to which great attention is being devoted.